Angelica Castillo was born on April 4th, 1987 in Queens, New York, to parents Margarita and Genaro Ramirez. She came from a Mexican immigrant family struggling with poverty, domestic abuse, and more. Ramirez was described as abusive by multiple sources, creating an environment of fear within the household. In 1991, when Angelica was just 4 years old, her parents were separated. Margarita had taken Angelica and at least one other daughter to visit their father, leaving the children with him for several days. When Margarita returned to retrieve her daughters, they were gone. According to her later accounts, she was told by a woman at the location that the children's father was not there, and that she should return later when he was present. When she came back, the children had disappeared. Margarita assumed that Ramirez had taken the children back to Mexico as he had previously threatened to do. In reality, Ramirez had left Angelica in the care of relatives in Astoria, Queens, specifically with his adult cousin, Balvina, who lived in an apartment shared by 7 relatives. In July 1991, Angelica was still living in an apartment in Queens. The living situation was far from ideal. She was severely malnourished, weighing only 28 pounds at 4 years old. Detective Jerry Giorgio, who worked the case from its inception, later said they must have been starving her because she weighed all of 28 pounds. She certainly did not have a good life, that is for sure. Among the people also living in the apartment was a man named Conrado Juarez, who would become a key figure in the case. According to statements he would later make, he viewed Angelica as a burden forced upon the family. As time passed and the situation continued to deteriorate, Juarez did something absolutely horrendous. Conrado Juarez told detectives that one night he was out drinking and went home to the apartment severely drunk. He encountered Angelica in the hallway of the apartment and took her by the hand, leading her to an empty bedroom. Conrado was quoted saying that the girl went with him, suggesting that she viewed the man as someone she could trust, making the incident all the more heartbreaking. According to the confession and statements made by law enforcement officials, Conrado bound Angelica to a table in the bedroom. Over an unspecified period of time, Conrado tortured the victim through various means, including sexual assault, which would later be confirmed during the autopsy. At some point during the assault, Angelica began to cry out. In order to silence her, Conrado placed a pillow over her face while carrying on. The medical examiner's office would later determine that the girl died from asphyxiation. The killer claimed that he, quote, didn't originally intend to kill Angelica, but suffocated her when she cried out. When she went motionless beneath the pillow, Conrado realized she was dead. The victim, who had trusted him enough to take his hand in the hallway, who had already suffered so much in her short life, had been tortured and murdered by her own cousin in an apartment full of relatives who apparently noticed nothing. Upon realizing that Angelica was dead, Conrado immediately summoned his sister Balvina from another room in the apartment. According to court documents, when Balvina discovered what her brother had done, her primary concern was not reporting the crime or seeking help for the murdered victim, but rather disposing of the evidence. She instructed Conrado to get rid of the body. She provided him with a 30-quart ice chest and told him, quote, fold the girl in half to fit inside. The siblings bound Angelica's body with rope and a Venetian blind cord. Her hands were pressed together and she was placed in a fetal position with her head resting on her knees. The body was then wrapped in a black plastic garbage bag. The cooler itself became a carefully constructed false scene. After placing the body inside, Conrado and Balvina filled the cooler with ice and unopened cans of soda to cover the body. After preparing the ice chest, Conrado and Balvina told their relatives in the apartment that they were going to the beach. The two then took a cab from Queens to Manhattan. Upon reaching their destination, Conrado and Balvina abandoned the cooler along an embankment near the Henry Hudson Parkway. The location was a patch of woods on an embankment that sloped down at a 45-degree angle from the highway toward the Hudson River. It was somewhat secluded, hidden from the direct view of passing motorists, yet accessible enough that the perpetrators could reach it. After disposing of the cooler, Conrado and Balvina separated and went their separate ways. They returned to their normal lives, and Angelica's body lay hidden in the woods in a picnic cooler, waiting to be discovered. Fast forward just 5 days, on July 23, 1991, construction workers stumbled upon the cooler. By this time, the ice had all melted and many of the soda cans had popped under the increasing pressure. This created a fluid that seeped through the lid of the ice chest, bringing with it a foul odor of decomposition. When authorities arrived to investigate, they found the body severely decayed. When investigators opened the cooler, they found that the victim was virtually a skeleton. Despite the decomposition, medical examiners were able to determine that Angelica had died of asphyxiation and had been sexually assaulted prior to her death. Early in the investigation, examiners concluded that the victim was possibly Hispanic, had dark wavy hair, and was estimated to be between 3 and 5 years old. A witness had reported seeing a Hispanic man and woman carrying a cooler in the location where the body was found, around the time the girl was estimated to have been murdered, though this lead did not immediately result in any breakthroughs. However, this witness refused to further help with identifying the duo, ultimately leading to a stall in the investigation. What followed was more than 2 decades of frustration. With no identification possible and no one reporting someone of that description missing, detectives named the victim Baby Hope. In 1993, 2 years after Baby Hope's body was discovered, NYPD detectives collected money from their own pockets to pay for her burial and headstone. Detective Giorgio's wife purchased a white dress for the little girl to be buried in, and a white casket was donated for the burial. Approximately 200 people attended the funeral, mass, and burial at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. The headstone they purchased bore the inscription "Because We Care" at the bottom. Each year on July 23rd, the anniversary of Baby Hope's discovery, detectives would return to the Washington Heights neighborhood. They canvassed the area, hung posters, distributed flyers with artist sketches of what Baby Hope might have looked like, and asked residents if they had any information. Detective Jerry Giorgio, who caught the case in 1991, worked on it throughout his entire career with the NYPD. Even after retiring from the police department, he joined the Manhattan District Attorney's cold case squad and continued pursuing leads. Assistant Chief Joseph Resnick, who had been a lieutenant when Baby Hope was found, also never gave up on the case. As forensic science advanced, investigators pursued every technological avenue available. In 2006, Baby Hope's body was exhumed to obtain DNA samples. When that testing did not yield matches with existing databases, her body was exhumed again in 2011 to create a more complete DNA profile using newer technology. In the autumn of 1991, just months after Baby Hope's discovery, suggestive photographs of an exposed child were found in New Jersey. Some investigators believe the images might depict Baby Hope, as the girl in the photographs matched the victim's description, but this lead did not result in identification. Then, abruptly, an anonymous woman called the Crime Stoppers hotline after seeing the renewed publicity about the case in 2013. According to sources, the tipster told authorities that she had overheard a conversation approximately 2 years earlier in a Washington Heights laundromat. In this conversation, she heard a woman discussing a missing daughter in a way that made it sound like the woman was Baby Hope's mother. The tip led detectives to investigate further, and they identified a woman in Washington Heights who might be connected to the case. Detective Donnell, who took the Crime Stoppers call, kept the caller on the phone for more than an hour to gather information. She had a good feeling about the tip, and it would prove to be the breakthrough that cracked the case. Armed with this lead, detectives located Margarita, a woman living in Washington Heights who matched the profile suggested by the tip. To obtain a DNA sample without alerting her to the full scope of the investigation, detectives employed a tactic that involved having Margarita lick an envelope for an unrelated purpose. The DNA from the envelope was compared to the profile created from Baby Hope's exhumed remains in 2011. The results came back positive. After 22 years, Baby Hope was finally identified as Angelica Castillo. On October 7, 2013, Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly announced that investigators had identified Baby Hope's mother through DNA testing and that she was cooperating with the investigation. The mother was not considered a suspect. Once the identity was confirmed, informed, detectives worked to piece together her family history and the circumstances of her death. The investigation led them to identify Angelica's father, Genaro Ramirez, who was believed to be in either New York City or Mexico at the time. However, as the investigation progressed, attention shifted to other family members. The investigation led police to two of Angelica's paternal cousins, Balvina and her brother Conrado. Balvina had since died, but Conrado was located working as a dishwasher at a restaurant on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village, Manhattan. On Friday, October 11th, 2013, detectives approached Conrado near the restaurant where he worked. He was taken in for questioning, and what followed was an interrogation that would last approximately 12 to 13 hours. During the interrogation, Conrado initially told police that he had helped dispose of Angelica's body but did not kill her. He claimed his sister had called him after the girl died and asked for his help. However, as the interrogation continued, he changed his story. According to Police Commissioner Kelly's announcement, Conrado ultimately confessed to the crime. He admitted that he had encountered Angelica in the hallway of their apartment and led her to an empty room where he assaulted and ultimately killed her. Furthermore, he shared that he asked Balvina for help in disposing of the remains. The confession was videotaped after an assistant district attorney arrived, but critically, the 12-hour interrogation that preceded it was not recorded. This would later become a point of contention in the legal proceedings. On October 11th, 2013, Conrado, age 52, was arrested and charged with second-degree felony murder. He was held without bail and arraigned the following day. After her daughter's identification and Conrado's arrest, Margarita faced intense public scrutiny and criticism for never having reported Angelica missing. Speaking to reporters through a closed door from her apartment in Elmhurst, Queens, she explained the complex circumstances that led to her silence. She said, "She wasn't missing, her father took the kids away, and maybe that was my mistake, letting him take them away. I did not go to the police because I was afraid of not being heard. I was afraid not knowing the language." Additionally, Margarita and other family members were undocumented immigrants who feared that reporting Angelica's disappearance would lead to deportation. Margarita told investigators that several years after her children disappeared, Conrado had contacted her, claiming he was raising her daughters and demanding money. When she went to his home, he only had one of her daughters and claimed he didn't know where Angelica was, saying that his sister said Angelica had died. Even then, Margarita did not go to the police, continuing to believe that Angelica might be with family members somewhere else. "We are never going to have peace," Margarita said after the arrest. "We are just waiting for justice." As news of the case began to spread, it revealed painful family secrets. Some members of Angelica's family had never known she existed. Angelica's sister, Lorena, who was 27 years old in 2013, said she first learned she had a sister who was killed when she was 11 years old, but it wasn't until the renewed publicity in October 2013 that she connected her missing sister to the Baby Hope case. "When I saw the news about Baby Hope on Tuesday, I got this feeling in my stomach," she told reporters. "I felt something like, could it be my sister? I was just crying because it was so horrible." She added that she had never met Conrado. Just days after his arrest, Conrado gave an interview to New York Times reporter Francis Robles from Rikers Island Jail. In this interview, Conrado recanted significant portions of his confession, claiming it had been coerced. He told the reporter that detectives had badgered him for hours during the interrogation, insisting on his guilt. He stated, "So after a while and after so much pressure, I accepted it and said what they wanted." He offered an alternative account, claiming that his sister Balvina had called him on his cell phone to say that Angelica had died in a fall down the stairs and that he had merely helped dispose of the body. However, as the New York Times noted, for this account to be accurate, Conrado would have had to be among the fewer than 3% of people in the United States who owned a mobile phone in 1991. His attorney, Michael Croce, challenged the validity of the confession from the beginning, stating that it was problematic and saw no evidence aside from the confession. The fact that the NYPD had not recorded the entire 12-hour interrogation became a significant issue. Despite Police Commissioner Ray Kelly's assurance the previous year that the NYPD would begin videotaping interrogations from start to finish, 2/3 of detective squads in the city had yet to implement this practice, and the room where Conrado was questioned was not equipped with video equipment. Legal experts noted that false confessions contribute to approximately 25% of wrongful convictions overturned with DNA evidence, and that recording interrogations from beginning to end is considered one of the best reforms to prevent coerced confessions. On October 21, 2013, a Manhattan grand jury indicted Conrado on an unspecified charge related to Angelica's murder. On November 20th, the indictment was unsealed in Manhattan Criminal Court, formally charging Conrado with second-degree murder. With a translator at his side, he pleaded not guilty. After 5 years in custody awaiting trial, scheduled to begin in March 2019, Conrado fell ill. On November 18th, 2018, at the age of 57, he died at Montefiore Nyack Hospital in Rockland County from complications related to pancreatic cancer. With this death, the case officially closed without a trial verdict. He died having entered a not guilty plea, maintaining to the end that his confession had been coerced. On April 21, 1988, 9-year-old Michael Henley Jr. embarked on what should have been an ordinary spring camping and hunting excursion that would instead become the start of a tragic missing persons case. Accompanied by his father and a family friend, the three ventured into the rugged wilderness of the Zuni Mountains for what was intended to be a fun and memorable adventure. The Zuni Mountains is a daunting mountain range located primarily in Cibola County of northwestern New Mexico, with a small portion extending into McKinley County. The range is situated largely within the Cibola National Forest and lies south of Interstate 40. The range's elevations span from 6,400 feet at the lower reaches to a peak of over 9,200 feet at Mount Sedgwick. Henley's group organized the camping trip to the Oso Ridge area of the mountains specifically to hunt wild turkey. When the hunting party arrived at the campsite that April afternoon, they immediately began setting up camp. This included setting up tents, organizing supplies, establishing a cooking area, and more. According to multiple accounts, the group had been at their campsite for approximately 20 minutes when Henley Jr. vanished without a trace. During this brief window, while his father and the family friend were occupied with setting up the camp and organizing their equipment, the 9-year-old boy simply disappeared. More than 400 volunteers would later turn out to search for the missing child. But in those critical first moments, Henley's father and friend conducted their own immediate search around the campsite area, calling out for the boy and scanning the surrounding landscape for any sign of him. They found nothing, no response to their calls, no visual sighting, and no indication of which direction Michael might have gone. The circumstances of the disappearance suggested that the boy had simply wandered away from the campsite, perhaps to explore the surrounding area, investigate something that caught his attention, or simply to move about after the drive to the mountains. For a 9-year-old boy in this new and exciting environment in the wilderness, it's not exactly unusual for him to accidentally drift off. However, the terrain of the mountains could disorient even experienced hikers. For a child, becoming lost in such an environment could happen within minutes, especially if he moved beyond the immediate sight and hearing range of the campsite. A critical factor that would linger at the forefront of the thinking of searchers and investigators was Henley's inadequate clothing for the environment. When last seen at the campsite that afternoon, he was wearing only a flannel shirt, pants, and a pair of tennis shoes. This light clothing might have been comfortable during the warmth of the April afternoon at the lower elevations or during the drive to the mountains, but it was woefully insufficient for the harsh conditions that can develop at high altitude in the mountains, particularly during the night or if weather conditions deteriorated. Despite the challenging conditions, search teams mobilized quickly to find the child. The intensive search operation lasted more than a week. Sheriff Ed Craig coordinated the efforts, and searchers left handwritten signs along the trails reading messages like, "This way, Michael, stay on road," in hopes that the lost boy might see them and find his way back to the base camp. As days turned into weeks with no results, the grim reality began to set in. The consensus among investigators was that Henley had likely wandered away from camp, become disoriented, and died of exposure to the elements. This tragic assessment was based on understanding of a phenomenon known as terminal burrowing, a behavior exhibited by victims in the final stages of severe hypothermia. When suffering from extreme cold, incoherent victims often instinctively crawl into tight, enclosed spaces for self-protection, such as hiding among boulders or beneath fallen logs. This survival instinct, ironically, can make the search for missing hikers in deep peril nearly impossible, as they effectively conceal themselves in the very moments when rescue is most critical. As months passed without any breakthrough, the disappearance gradually faded from the news cycle. For the child's grieving parents, there was no closure, no body to bury, and no definitive answers about their son's final moments. Then, more than a year after Michael went missing, something extraordinary happened that would thrust the case back into the national spotlight and connect it to one of America's most infamous unsolved mysteries. On June 15, 1989, approximately 14 months after the disappearance, a woman was leaving a junior food store in Port St. Joe, Florida. As she walked through the parking lot, she noticed a Polaroid photograph lying face down on the ground in what had been an empty parking space. The photograph depicted a haunting scene: a teenage girl and a smaller boy lying on what appeared to be sheets and a blue and white striped pillow in the back of a vehicle. Both individuals had their mouths covered with black duct tape, and their hands appeared to be bound behind their backs. The girl glared directly at the camera while the boy looked terrified. The woman who discovered the photo told police that when she had arrived at the store earlier, a white, windowless Toyota cargo van had been parked in that very spot. The van was being driven by a white male with a mustache who appeared to be in his 30s. By the time she returned to her vehicle and found the photograph, the van and its driver had departed. Also visible in the photograph were several intriguing objects, such as a copy of a novel titled My Sweet Audrina. The book was a 1982 bestseller about a young girl haunted by her sister's death that deals with themes of and PTSD. There appeared to be a partially readable phone number written on the spine of the book, though some digits were illegible. Experts later determined it could represent approximately 300 possible numbers, of which only 57 were valid phone numbers. Critically, officials from Polaroid examined the photograph and determined that it could not have been taken before May 1989, as that particular type of film was not available until then. This timeline would prove significant in identifying and eventually ruling out the people depicted in the image. The photograph made national news when it aired on the television tabloid program A Current Affair in July 1989. The broadcast caught the attention of family and friends in New Mexico, who immediately recognized a haunting resemblance in the bound girl to Tara Calico, a 19-year-old college student who had vanished under mysterious circumstances in Valencia County, New Mexico. Calico had disappeared on the morning of September 20th, 1988, 5 months after Michael Henley went missing, while on her daily bicycle ride along Highway 47 near Belen. She had left her home around 9:30 a.m., riding her mother's neon pink Huffy mountain bike for what was supposed to be a routine ride. Before leaving, she told her mother, Patty, to come look for her if she wasn't home by noon, as she had plans to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30 p.m. When Calico failed to return home by noon, Patty drove along her daughter's usual route searching for her, but found no sign of her. She then immediately contacted police. The next day, Patty discovered a Boston cassette tape belonging to her daughter lying on the shoulder of the road 3 miles from their home, on the opposite side of the highway, as if Calico had dropped it while riding away from her residence. Later, part of her Sony Walkman was recovered 19 miles east of Highway 47 near the remote John F. Kennedy campground. Near the cassette tape, investigators found bike tracks and marks resembling a scuffle or skids. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Calico during her bike ride that morning, with the last confirmed sighting occurring at approximately 11:45 a.m. on Highway 47, about 2 miles from her home. Several witnesses also reported seeing a dirty white or light gray 1953 Ford pickup truck with a white handmade shell following closely behind Calico as she rode, though she appeared to be wearing headphones and seemed unaware of the vehicle's presence. No one witnessed the actual abduction, and neither Calico nor her mother's pink bicycle were ever found. When the mysterious photo was broadcast on television, both the Calico family and the Henley family were contacted by people who had seen the program and believed they recognized their missing loved ones in the photograph. Patty met with investigators in Florida to examine the photograph firsthand. After spending approximately 2 hours examining the image and conversing with detectives, she stated that she was convinced the girl in the photograph was her daughter. Additionally, V.C. Andrews was reportedly Calico's favorite author, and My Sweet Audrina was one of her preferred books, making the presence of that specific novel in the photograph seem like more than a mere coincidence. Michael Henley's parents also traveled to Florida to view the image. After examining it, Michael's mother Marty stated that she was almost certain the boy depicted in the Polaroid was her missing son. Looking at the photograph of the frightened child, she told reporters, "He appears frightened, very frightened, but he seems to be in good health, and I'm thankful for that." Sheriff Ed Craig, who had overseen the initial search for Michael in 1988, called the television segment featuring the Polaroid quote, "the best lead we've had in 16 months." The photograph was forwarded to FBI crime laboratories for detailed analysis, including facial measurement comparisons with other photos of the missing pair. However, the FBI's conclusion was frustrating as they shared their findings were inconclusive. The FBI could not definitively determine whether the girl in the photograph was Calico or whether the boy was Michael. Adding to the confusion, a Scotland Yard analyzed the photograph and concluded that the woman depicted was indeed the missing Tara Calico. However, a second analysis conducted by the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed with Scotland Yard's assessment, determining that the girl in the photo was someone else. With the FBI's analysis remaining inconclusive and conflicting opinions from different forensic laboratories, no definitive identification could be made. Over the following weeks and months, reported sightings of both missing persons began coming in from various locations across the American South, as if their captor or captors were drifting from town to town. Michael was reportedly sighted in Arkansas. Each new rumor rekindled hope among the families that someday, miraculously, their children would be returned to them safe. Police staged roadblocks in an attempt to intercept the white Toyota van and its driver, but the vehicle was never located and the man was never identified. Then, in June 1990, approximately 2 years after Michael's disappearance, the case took an abrupt turn that would shatter the hopes of the Henley family and cast serious doubt on whether the boy in the Polaroid had ever been Michael at all. A rancher riding a fence line in the Zuni Mountains discovered a scattering of bones in a thick group of juniper trees. The remains were those of a child, located approximately 6 to 7 miles from the campsite where Michael had disappeared more than 2 years earlier. The discovery site was about 75 miles from the location where Calico had vanished. Scraps of clothing found at the scene were consistent with what Michael had been wearing when he went missing. Sheriff Craig immediately informed Michael's parents of his suspicions about the identity of the remains, though positive identification would take time. What makes it so hard to identify is that he didn't have enough medical records, broken bones, x-rays. He'd only been to the dentist twice, Sheriff Craig explained to the media. Without extensive dental records or other medical documentation for comparison, the forensic identification process was challenging. One by one, reports of other missing local children were accounted for and ruled out. It took 5 days for the Cibola County medical examiner to complete the analysis and make a positive identification. The skeletal remains were confirmed through dental records to be those of Michael Henley Jr. The autopsy and forensic examination revealed that Michael had succumbed to exposure to the elements, specifically hypothermia, after wandering away from his family's campsite. Crucially, the medical examiner found no signs of foul play whatsoever. The evidence painted a tragic but clear picture. Michael had walked away from the campsite while his father and friend were setting up camp, become lost and disoriented in the rugged terrain of the mountains, and died from exposure to the cold before searchers could locate him. The discovery location, approximately 7 miles from the original campsite, suggested that the frightened child had wandered for some distance trying to find his way back. The discovery of Michael's remains and the determination that he died of exposure in April 1988 definitively ruled out the possibility that Michael could have been the boy depicted in the Polaroid photograph found in Florida in June 1989. Given that Polaroid officials had confirmed the film used could not have been available before May 1989, more than a year after Michael's death, it became impossible for the boy in the photograph to be Michael Henley. This revelation cast serious doubt on the entire Polaroid mystery. If Michael's identification had been incorrect, despite his mother's near certainty, could Calico's identification also be mistaken? The fact that Michael Henley was definitively not the boy in the photograph raised questions about the reliability of parental identifications made under extreme emotional distress and desperate hope. Michael's father told reporters that learning the truth about what had happened to his son brought no relief. He said, "There is no closure in knowing your child died alone, frightened and cold in the mountains."